at 4:17 in the morning on February 6, 2023. A magnitude 7.8 earthquake ripped through southern Turkey. Millions of people were asleep. The shaking lasted over 60 seconds. In that single minute, entire apartment blocks collapsed straight down, floor on top of floor, compressing everything and everyone inside into a space of inches. 9 hours later, a second earthquake struck, magnitude 7.7, 59 miles from the first. Buildings that had barely survived the morning were shaken apart. Over 59,000 people were killed. 230,000 buildings were damaged or destroyed. And when investigators finally examined the rubble, they discovered something that would turn an entire nation's grief into white-hot fury. Because these buildings did not fall because of the earthquake. They fell because someone decided they did not need to be safe. The earthquake was centered near the city of Kahramanmaras, in southeastern Turkey. This region sits directly on top of the East Anatolian Fault, one of the most dangerous geological boundaries on Earth. Turkey has been hit by devastating earthquakes throughout its history. None of this was a surprise. What made the 2023 earthquake uniquely catastrophic was not just its magnitude. It was a combination of factors that, when they came together, created the deadliest earthquake disaster anywhere on Earth in over a decade. First, the timing. 4:17 in the morning. The vast majority of the population was inside, asleep, in their beds, in apartment buildings that ranged from 4 to 12 stories high. During the day, many of those people would have been outside, in cars, in open spaces, in lower structures. At 4 in the morning, they were stacked vertically, floor above floor, in the most vulnerable position possible. Second, the scale. This was not one earthquake. The initial magnitude 7.8 quake was one of the most powerful recorded anywhere in the 21st century. The rupture zone stretched nearly 200 miles along the fault. And then, 9 hours later, a magnitude 7.7 aftershock hit 59 miles away. Two massive quakes striking the same region on the same day. The odds of that are astronomically rare. Third, and most important, the buildings. Engineers who examined the wreckage identified a pattern that was unmistakable and damning. The buildings had not failed the way earthquake-resistant structures are designed to fail. A properly engineered building will crack, sway, and deform. The walls may break, but the core holds long enough for people to escape. What happened in southern Turkey was the opposite. Buildings pancaked. The columns simply snapped, and when the columns go, there is nothing to stop the floors from falling straight down, one on top of the other, like a deck of cards pressed flat. Engineers call this a pancake collapse. It is the most lethal form of structural failure. When a building pancakes, the space between floors is compressed to almost nothing. People lying in bed on the 7th floor are suddenly buried under 6 floors of solid concrete. There is no void to survive in. Just wait. Across 11 provinces, covering an area roughly the size of Germany, entire city blocks were reduced to stacked layers of rubble. In the city of Antakya, in Hatay province, apartment complexes that had been 8 stories tall were now 1 story high. The rest was compressed into the ground. In Adıyaman, a city of 600,000 people, members of the Karabas family were on the 8th floor of their building when the shaking began. The father Mehmet, later described how they were jolted awake on what had been a peaceful night, and in seconds, everything around them was falling. Their building, once 8 stories, was reduced to a single story of compressed rubble. 10 members of their extended family were killed, including a 2-month-old baby. In the town of Islahi, a 34-year-old school teacher named Ali Kafadenk was sleeping in bed with his wife Merv when the shaking started. Merv poked him awake. He told her it would pass. Then 2 opposite walls of their bedroom collapsed inward, forming an upside-down V shape over their bed, a concrete tent. The ceiling was so low they could not sit up. Ali threw himself over Merv to protect her. They lay there in the dark, unable to move, covered in dust, waiting. He described the sound of the building sinking around them. He said it was a sound he had never heard before. Supernatural, like extremely loud, low thunder rolling through the earth beneath them. They prayed together. They told each other that they came from God and they would go back to God. They believed they were going to die. After an hour and a half, someone outside heard them shouting and pulled them free. The man who rescued them said 7 words that Ali would never forget. He said, "I have 7 children trapped under the rubble over there. I just heard you, so I came to help. But now I need to go deal with my children." That was the reality of this earthquake. A man pulled 2 strangers from the rubble and then walked away to try to save his own family because there was simply no one else coming. Ali later returned to the ruins of his building. Out of dozens of residents, only 2 others had survived. He recovered a few things from the wreckage. Among them were letters of appreciation from his students. He did not know how many of those students were still alive. He stood in front of a mountain of rubble and said that seeing it made him feel like he was living through it all over again. But here is where the earthquake became something even worse. At 1:24 in the afternoon, 9 hours after the first quake, the ground moved again. A 7.7 magnitude earthquake struck 59 miles to the northeast. Buildings that had been damaged that morning but remained standing now collapsed. Rescue workers inside unstable structures were buried. Families who had returned to grab documents were trapped when weakened walls gave way. People pulled alive from rubble in the morning were killed by the second quake in the afternoon. Over the following 10 days, more than 10,000 aftershocks shook the region. The ground would not stop moving. Survivors slept in streets, in cars, in February temperatures well below freezing. Parents wrapped children in blankets on frozen pavement, staring at apartment blocks that might come down at any moment. Doctors performed surgeries in tents because the hospitals were too dangerous to enter. And then the waiting began. Tens of thousands of people were still alive under the rubble, and the rescue was falling apart. Turkey's Disaster Management Agency, AFAD, was supposed to coordinate the response. But in Hatay, the AFAD regional headquarters had itself collapsed. The building designed to save lives was a pile of rubble. Roads were destroyed, bridges gone. The airport at Hatay was unusable because The runway had been split in two. Heavy machinery could not get through. In many areas, for the first 24 to 48 hours, the only rescue was being done by neighbors digging through concrete with their bare hands, fathers clawing through rubble to reach their children. In Osmaniye, a young woman named Gulhan was inside her home with her mother Özlem when the building collapsed. A wardrobe crushed her ankle. She was pinned deep in the wreckage. She could hear her mother screaming, my girl, where are you?" But her mother could not hear her. So she picked up a stone and began hitting it against a door over and over. Her mother, who had broken ribs, tried to pull her through a gap so small that even a cat could not have fit through it. No professional rescuers arrived for hours. Firefighters from northern Turkey eventually found her. It took them 9 hours to extract her. She was rescued on the 4th day. When she woke up in intensive care, they told her that her mother, her father, and her brother had all died in the same building. Across the earthquake zone, stories like Gulhan's played out tens of thousands of times. A 12-year-old boy named Mustafa was pulled alive from rubble in Antakya after 228 hours, 9.5 days. When rescuers found him, they thought he was dead. His eyes were open, but he was still. Then he whispered a single word, "Brother." A baby girl was born in the rubble in Jindiris, Syria. Her umbilical cord was still attached to her mother when rescuers found her. Her mother had died after giving birth. The baby was the sole survivor of her family. They named her Aya. A man named Mustafa Avci was pulled from a collapsed hospital after 261 hours, 11 days. When they handed him a phone, his first words were, "Did everyone escape? Let me hear their voices." Now, at this point in the story, you are probably asking yourself the same question that 50 million Turkish citizens were asking in the weeks after the earthquake. How is it possible that a country that has experienced devastating earthquakes throughout its entire history, a country that sits on top of some of the most dangerous fault lines in the world, a country that has modern building codes specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of collapse, how is it possible that 230,000 buildings failed? The answer is one of the most infuriating stories in modern political history. In 2018, 5 years before the earthquake, the Turkish government passed a construction amnesty. If you owned a building that violated earthquake safety codes, if it had been built without proper permits, if the steel reinforcement was inadequate, if the foundations were wrong, you could pay a fee to the government and receive a certificate that legally forgave all of those violations. You did not have to fix anything. You did not have to bring the building up to code. You just paid. The government collected over $3 billion in fees. More than 10 million people applied. And here is the number that should stop you cold. Over half of Turkey's 13 million buildings did not meet safety standards. In the 10 provinces hit by the earthquake, nearly 295,000 buildings had received amnesty certificates. The government knew these buildings were unsafe. They charged a fee. They said they would look the other way. But it gets worse. President Erdogan did not just quietly sign this law, he campaigned on it. In 2019, during rallies in southern Turkey, he was filmed boasting about the amnesty program. In a video from Kahramanmaras, the epicenter of the earthquake, he told the crowd that his government had solved the problems of 144,156 citizens with zoning amnesty. In Hatay, the hardest-hit province, he said he had solved the problems of 205,000 citizens. Zoning peace, he called it. He stood in the exact cities where those amnestied buildings would collapse 4 years later, and he bragged about making them legal. After the earthquake, the government moved quickly to control the narrative. Over 230 contractors and developers were arrested. One developer, Engin Aslan, whose residential complex in Antakya killed over 230 people when it collapsed, was caught at Istanbul airport trying to board a flight to Montenegro. He was arrested on the spot. The government framed the disaster as the fault of corrupt builders. But Turkey's main association of architects and engineers had issued a warning months before the earthquake that could not have been more direct. They warned that zoning amnesty is an invitation to death. Anyone voting for a planning amnesty, they said, is responsible for incitement to murder. Across the border in Syria, the earthquake exposed a different cruelty. Northwestern Syria, particularly opposition-held Idlib, was among the hardest-hit areas. This region had already been shattered by 12 years of civil war. When the earthquake struck, the Assad government controlled the border crossings for humanitarian aid. For days, aid was funneled through government territory while the people of Idlib dug through rubble with their bare hands. Turkey received rescue teams from dozens of countries. Idlib received almost nothing. People died not because help did not exist, but because the politics of a civil war decided they did not deserve it. The earthquake struck 3 months before Turkey's elections. The amnesty law, the videos, the crony contracts, the collapsed disaster headquarters, the airport runway built on a fault line split in two. In any functioning democracy, this would end a career. Erdogan framed the reconstruction as a national mission, pointed to the arrests as accountability, and won re-election. Here is the final detail that ties this entire story together. In 2013, a decade before the earthquake, Erdogan posted a public message. He wrote that buildings kill, not earthquakes. He was right. In southern Turkey, on February 6, 2023, 59,000 people were killed, not by the movement of the earth, but by the buildings. Their own government had certified as safe, collected billions for granting amnesty, and bragged about on camera in the exact cities where those buildings would later collapse on sleeping families at 4:17 in the morning. A 12-year-old boy lay silent in the rubble for 9.5 days before someone found him. A baby was born into a pile of concrete, her umbilical cord still connected to her dead mother. A school teacher crawled from his bedroom through a concrete tent and discovered that almost everyone in his building was gone. and a man who rescued two strangers walked away to find his own 7 children. Because in the middle of the deadliest earthquake in Turkey's modern history, there was simply no one else to help. Buildings kill, not earthquakes. He said it himself, and then for 10 years, he made sure that was exactly what would happen. If you found this story important, hit subscribe. Stories like these need to be told, and most people have never heard them.